Chapter 2. A Night Out in Houston, 1 year before. When do illusion and reality collide? Is it possible to have both, or maybe the two ideas can't occupy the same space? The reality of life caught up with me. I made a bad decision, and now I had to pay the price. This time I left all the illusions behind, and tried to live in the real world. Robert was a friend whom I met shortly after Mike died. He was a lawyer and had been divorced for a few years. I met him on a double date with acquaintances from work, Zach and Allison. I knew in an instant that Zach was interested in Allison, and physically, I was attracted to Robert, Allison's date. Robert was a fine, deliciously handsome man, yet that did not prevent his wife from wanting another man. He is tall and easygoing, but he had the misfortune of his wife leaving him for the doctor next door. The way doctors' lives are structured, I'm surprised they have the time. Maybe that's what they do when we are waiting in those cold, silent, lifeless waiting rooms, seduce their next-door neighbors' wives. Allison, a young woman of 30, full of gossip, said Robert's wife and the doctor ran away when Robert was at a conference in San Francisco. Robert, devastated and broken before I met him, tried to date with not much success. Zach and I met Robert and Allison at an Italian restaurant in Houston that served wonderful food. The decor was expensive and the food was pricey. You could tell Robert had a desire and appreciation for the best food, wine, and women. Allison loved to give the appearance that she was a young woman of means, and therefore required a man of the same distinction. Deception appears to be the mask people are wearing when they aren't wearing the mask of perception. The entire evening Robert was gazing at me, and Allison eyed my date. She had radar for money. Allison gestured that we run to the restroom to size up our dates and make adjustments. Her tactics were straight out of high school. As we entered the restroom, "Sydney, I'm a little uncomfortable with Robert because he's so tall," she said, trying to manipulate me. Allison was 5'1", and Robert was 6'2", the same height as Danny, but he was a visual contrast to Danny. Robert dressed in suits and Danny preferred jeans and tees. Danny would only wear a suit on special occasions, a modeling shoot where the attire is provided. "I think Robert is so good-looking, and his height is an asset," I said, smiling. Allison was the kind of person who didn't care about anyone's feelings but her own. She was ready to ditch Robert for my short rich date. It was all about money with Allison. Money turned her on, because she didn't have any. She was dirt poor as a child, and never wanted to want for anything again. Her dating objectives were clear: date rich, marry rich, and live happily ever after, no matter who she had to fuck. She had that mantra in college. She would seduce any man and kiss a frog until she found her prince, the one who would support her in the fashion that she dreamed. She met many of her dates at the strip club, where she danced nightly to pay for college. The men wanted her to live with them, but they never mentioned marriage. "Allison, it's not a problem with me, but wouldn't the guys mind, especially Robert?" "Don't worry about Robert. I saw the way he was looking at you," she explained convincingly. "Let me handle everything," she said, as she threw her long blonde hair to the side and strutted like a stripper preparing for her night on the pole. The way Allison operated reminded me of my years with Mike and his sexual manipulations. Allison handled the exchange of partners like a butcher welding a knife, sharpened to perfection and cutting with precision. Robert appeared delighted with the exchange, because he did not appear to care for women who drank too much. Allison was close to a drunk or better, which did not bother Zach in the least. Allison coyly exchanged chairs. Robert and I became a lonely pair. Robert offered to drive me to my hotel, which was an hour's drive to the Woodlands from the restaurant. It was a long ride, but Robert didn't seem to mind. He acted as if he had nothing better to do. How long are you going to be in town? I don't know. I came to spend time with my family. I just didn't want to stay too close to home. I needed to see some college friends, I said. Oh, Zach is a guy from college? He asked, trying to learn more about me. No, he is an editor for the magazine that employs me. He's also one of the owners. You're a writer? That's interesting. Can I read some of your writing? Yes, all you have to do is pick up the WOW magazine. I think I will. We're here, he said, a little disappointed and surprised at how fast we arrived at the Marriott. Robert appeared to be a lonely man, a man who seemed to have everything, but you could see he was a man that wasn't loved. His face was sad even when he tried to smile. He reminded me of myself now. So I invited him to my room for more conversation and a drink. Robert and I became great friends over that one night. I knew we were getting close, and I didn't want to get too close to any man soon after a divorce. He is handsome, available, just the right age, a man in his 30s, but I wasn't interested. I needed to see the world, and I needed to grow up. I needed to experience more men to find out what life was about, so I moved to New York. I got what I needed. A year later. After leaving Danny, I'm now in Houston to find Robert again, to stave off the love withdrawal. I called Robert on his home phone, hoping he was still single. He answered, and agreed to meet me in the Woodlands at the same hotel. Robert drove up in a new convertible Mercedes. He met me with an air of sophistication and confidence, something I did not see before. There were plenty of signs I didn't see or recognize. He was like a neon sign flashing at a cheap motel on a cold, rainy, lonely night. Welcome. Sydney, you look wonderful. How did I let you get away from me? Robert, you look great too. His eyes follow my every move, and then he hugged me and gave me a burning kiss. After we concluded complimenting each other, he asked me to come to his home and stay as long as I wanted. I took him up on his invitation that very night. Robert had an enormous home in the River Oaks section of Houston. It sat alone on 2 acres of property, spacious, expensive, and empty. His house had been empty of furniture and romance since his wife's departure. She took most of the furniture, including their bed. That must have been a blow to him. What kind of woman takes a man's bed to sleep with another man? I eased some of his pain by telling him that I would help him furnish his home. He thought that this was an encouraging sign. I wasn't being nice, I needed a place to hide, and I hid away hoping no one would find me. I made myself comfortable, and found a room that had a beautiful sleigh bed down the hallway from Robert's bedroom. He still slept in the room he shared with his wife. I think he was holding on to a dream the way I was still holding on to Danny, even as I proceeded to shatter my life. Robert was happy to come home, to find me waiting for him every day. Here I go again, stealing a heart and hiding it for later. I had become such a thief of the mind and spirit that I did not know that I was stealing from myself. Robert didn't ask for love or sex, he said he just enjoyed me being with him. I spent my time cooking and writing. I called Zach to tell him I needed time off from my job, and he gave me all the time necessary. Besides, Zach owned the magazine and he owed me a favor. I introduced him to Allison, and I hear they're getting married. Living at Robert's home no more than a month, I began to feel nauseous, lightheaded, and weak. Every smell made me dizzy. Every thought of Danny made me sick. I felt I had some incurable disease, and I was dying of a broken heart. I convinced myself to go to a doctor to take some test. I drove to the nearest medical center in Houston to see a physician friend of Robert. I didn't know what was wrong. I walked into the office feeling a sense of freedom, but sick. I was sure it was some kind of flu. In Texas there is always flu, the Hong Kong flu, bird flu, you take your choice. It had been a month since I walked out on Danny, and everything I wanted in life. I didn't want to think about Danny. I didn't want to talk to Danny. I wanted space and time, which Robert gave in abundance. I felt so sick every time I thought about Danny, so I chose not to think. I was in denial, and I was happy to postpone the inevitable, thinking and talking to Danny. Heather was the only person I confided in. I didn't want anyone to think I had been abducted. Tracy from New York called to tell Heather to contact me, because Danny was going crazy looking for me. He hired an investigator to track me down. However, I knew it would be almost impossible to find me, because we were so busy talking about sex when he was away, and having sex when he came to New York, that he knew little about my family and I knew even less about him. We were only into each other. An hour passed waiting for the doctor and I was feeling worse. Finally the doctor asked to see me. He asked me a few questions, took some tests, and within minutes gave me news that made me feel as if I would scream. I remember the day and hour the doctor said, "You're pregnant." "You have got to be kidding," I stammered. "No, I'm not, that can't be true, that test has to be wrong," I stated as if I knew something the doctor did not know. "That is not unusual for a woman of your age." "Let's see, you are about 18 or 20, right?" he said, sounding like a palm reader instead of a doctor. "No, doctor, look at my chart, I'm 25. "Oh," said the doctor, a bit incredulous. "You certainly are in good shape." "Thanks," I said sarcastically. "You are a very attractive woman," he said, looking at me hoping to get lucky. I thanked the doctor, who should have had his license revoked for his remarks. I walked out of his office stunned. I did not see or hear anything. I was in a daze, and I kept walking. I didn't see the car barreling down on me, until someone grabbed me and pushed me aside. I could have been killed, I thought. No, I'm dead. That was not the worst. Oh my God, I had never become pregnant in all the time I was married to Mike, and I wasn't very careful. Now here I am having a baby for a baby. This is crazy, I reasoned, going out of my mind. What am I going to do? I thought. What can I do? Tell Robert, because I'm not going to tell Danny. I can't tell Danny, he wouldn't believe me. No, he would believe me. I'm just not going to do it. This is crazy, I said over and over as I lumbered to my car. I had begun my thievery, and now I was trying to figure a way to steal from Robert, who has had too much larceny in his life. My mind was trying to figure out a way to tell Robert that I was pregnant for my young lover. I would not tell him how much I loved this man, because I knew how Robert felt about me. How was I going to weave this cloth of deceit into a garment of lies to fit Robert? I felt I had time to tell Robert. I would give myself a few months, I reasoned. I knew little of the art of reasoning. A strange thought was to tell him the truth, well, some of the truth. Robert came home on Valentine's Day with roses, which reminded me of the roses Danny gave me when we first met. I stood and looked at Robert and I was motionless, transfixed in time. Danny would send roses often when I lived in New York, and he attached a card with one stanza of a poem he loved. He always sent me poetry or tried singing a song as a substitute for what he could not say. The last roses I received from Danny, before I left for Las Vegas, the card said, "I met a lady in the meads. Full beautiful, a fairy's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. Love, Danny." I recognized that poem. It is La Belle Dame sans Merci by John Keats. The Beautiful Lady Without Mercy. I read it in college. Was he sending me a message? Sydney, what's wrong? Robert said, snapping his fingers. I was just thinking about how beautiful the roses are and how thoughtful, I said with a quiet lie. I want you to have them because you don't know how much it means to me to have you here, and someone to be here when I get home. He had this earnest look on his face. I began to see how handsome he is. He has steel blue eyes and a small nose with a broad jaw. His hair is coarse and medium brown, not so much as to make him look cute. He began kissing me, and for the first time I didn't stop him. He reached for my hand and led me to his bedroom with the flowers in hand, and we disrobed. He began by touching my shoulder gently. His hands were shaking. His hands moved onto my breast. I lay motionless like a doll, and then he smothered me in kisses. I closed my eyes and my mind traveled. I thought I was with Danny. I wanted to be with Danny. I wanted Robert to be Danny. I opened my eyes and I had to face the moment. I was not making love to Danny, it was Robert. I held his arms as he lay above me, and I could tell he felt about me the way I felt about Danny. I was in a love triangle. I am transferring my love for Danny to Robert. I held his arms and closed my eyes to feel the passion I missed from Danny. The masquerade as a loving partner took on a new life, and I became good at my deception. I was now a better actor than Danny. I should have been nominated for an Academy Award, because I made Robert feel as if he was the only man in the world. I tried to reach an orgasm because it had been so easy with Danny. I tried to love Robert because it was so easy to love Danny. I was hopelessly in love with Danny, and I had no way out. Robert could not help me escape. I did not reach satisfaction with Robert. I did not find passionate love for Robert, because my heart was cold for everyone except Danny. Every time I looked at Robert it was Danny, every time I slapped, ate, breathed air it was Danny. I felt as if my life was in ruins, because of the carelessly low price I stamped on love. After I satisfied Robert to the fullest, I was ready to confess. Someone said confession is good for the soul, probably a man who fused lying with confessions. Robert, they first have something to tell you. Robert looked worried. Maybe his wife had uttered the same words after they made love, because it struck a familiar chord. What is it? Tell me now, he said, trying to anticipate my words. I'm pregnant for someone, I said, expecting a question. He let me speak. I found out 2 months ago, and I didn't know what to say to you. When you came home, I was so happy to see you, I forgot all about it, I stated, waiting for an answer. Robert did not speak for a long time as he glared into my eyes, but not looking into them, and when he did speak, he said, I don't see anything wrong with what has happened. You didn't commit murder. You don't have to tell me more. I just want you to be happy, and I'm happy. I didn't commit murder, really? I murdered any chance for happiness. I will take care of you, and if you want I will adopt your child, or you can marry me and no one has to know any better. There is that word again, marry. There I go with my mind dancing on dangerous ground. Marry a man I didn't love, a second time, and give the man's baby whom I loved to the man I didn't love. I must have lost my mind when I entertained the thought. I'm a mental case, and I plead guilty on the grounds of insanity. I didn't marry Robert Farrell, but I let him adopt my baby. His name became Sean Farrell. I was an idiot masquerading as a sophisticated, mature woman of the world. Wow. Chapter 3. Danny awakes alone in Las Vegas. Danny lay on his stomach on the soft sheets that soothed his warm body. He turned over on his back, then moved from one side to the next, trying to get comfortable. He wore a smile of pleasurable peace across his handsome face. He dreamed a happy dream. He was far away, and lost in the pleasures of the past night. Nothing could be more delightful to the spirit than to love, and to receive love, to capture and conquer the heart of the love of your life, he unconsciously thought. He languished in his thoughts of Sydney for a few more minutes. He loved her because she is who she is, her walk, her voice, her hair, her lips, her smell. It wasn't the wind and the sudden summer rain dragging Danny from his peaceful existence. It wasn't the stranger standing near his bed when he felt a disturbance. It was the lack of air that was present. The coldness of the room and the omission of warmth in his bed confused his mind. His mind could not grasp the chill of his body. Everything was out of sync, and there was no harmony in his soul. His unconscious mind felt the void of warmth, and his eyelids opened. Danny's hand felt around for the spot where Sydney had lain. He did not believe his senses, he did not listen to his thoughts, he did not follow the spark of intuition that settled on his brain. He chose to overlook the reality for a lie his mind could digest. He dismissed any thoughts he had or could have at that moment in time. He opened his mouth to hear his voice beckon his lover, his life. "Sydney, Sid, where are you? Come here, I want you, come here, I have something for you," Danny said playfully while looking at his erection and the diamond ring he planned to present Sydney. A restless Danny called out to Sydney once again. He wanted to continue their lovemaking, and he knew he would get something special when he presented her with a 10.00 CTW diamond engagement ring. Danny, 20 years old, and his sexuality climbing, wanted to make love to Sydney anytime and any place. He was into her in every way and fashion. She only had to say the word, and he would devote his life to her. "I have something for you, Sid, get out here," he insisted, sure she was playing games with him. Danny sat up, wiping the sleep from his eyes, looking around, watching the sun cast an ominous shadow across his face, blinding him to the figure standing near his bed. "You want your room cleaned?" the woman said, in a distinct Russian accent. He ignored her, thinking Sydney let her in. "Sydney, Sydney." "No one's there, mister." "No, I don't want my room cleaned." "Go. Clean when I'm out." He motioned to the maid, who knew only a little English. He reached for his cell and dialed Sydney's number. He dialed repeatedly, until he decided to jump out of bed to see for himself. Disbelief ran rampant, and it still did not penetrate his brain that she was gone. His heart skipped a beat, he could not catch his breath, his breathing was slow and short. He felt as if he was breathing 1,000 breaths in that 1 minute. He needed a drink. He remembered he promised Sydney that he would lay off drinking. It wasn't that easy. When she was with him, he did not need anything or anyone. Danny walked closer to the bar with his heart pounding, and a feeling of desperation covered him like a thick fog on the lochs of Scotland. He was in a bad place, and he fell into a black hole that did not release him. He walked slowly to the bar as if tethered with a rope, and something dragging him closer and closer, until there was no room between him and the drink. He reached for his poison of choice, scotch. Danny poured it straight, no water, no ice. The heat from the drink replaced the cold feeling that swam across his soul. The warmth intervened in his cold thoughts of Sydney. He began to feel helpless. He gave in to the moment that surrounded him. He drank until he could not drink any more that day. Finally, he woke to the sound of chimes from the hotel phone. Danny didn't know who was calling, because his senses were dull. He was hoping and praying it was Sydney. He reached for the phone with a weak hand. "Hey Danny, Max here." It was Max Stein, his agent and friend. Max, good to hear from you." "What's wrong, Danny?" "I think Sydney left me," Danny said, pouring his heart out to anyone who would listen. "I'm sorry, Danny, but you have to meet me." "I'm at Caesar's," Max stated in a business-as-usual tone. "I can't go. I have to find Sydney." "Look, Danny, are you going to let that woman ruin your career?" She's not just any woman. I love her. She's going to be my wife. Do you hear yourself? How is she going to be your wife when she walked out on you and you can't find her? Face it, she doesn't want you and you don't need her. You are a star, and you could have a long life in this business if you don't fuck this up. There are plenty of women out there. Piss off, you don't know what you are talking about and you don't know her. Okay, Danny, when you are ready to hear the truth, let me know. In the meantime, if you want to keep your job, you'd better get your ass over here tonight. You signed a 2-picture deal, and if you aren't ready to go back to work, that company will sue you. You know what that will mean. All that money and hard work will get flushed down the toilet. Danny wasn't listening. His mind could not hold any more. It was full thinking about Sydney. Danny managed to pull together his body to meet Max. The hotel phone rang and rang. It was Max again. I'm coming, Max, he shouted and slammed the phone to the floor. Danny willed his feet out of the chair onto the floor, into his clothes, and then into his shoes. He had no desire for anything but a drink. He could barely dress himself after showering, and he did not shave. He stood in a dark and lonely place with no light in sight. He had this flaw. It started when he was a teenager, and the day his mother left his father, taking only his twin brother Jeremy. He had not seen them since he was 12 years old. Shortly afterwards, at 16, his life descended into hell with drinking. Now he was traveling that lonely road again. Danny lumbered into the elevator, taking the same path Sydney walked to leave him. Why was everyone leaving him, he thought. He stood in one of the many lobbies of the Wynn Hotel, as he struggled to place sunglasses on his eyes. It was in the middle of the night. His desire was to hide, because he did not want the world to know he exists. What did it matter? He was lonely and unloved, a gorgeous hunk of a man, a movie star, and alone again. He put his hands into his pockets and walked down the long corridor of shops lined on each side of the walkway. People walking were smiling. That should have been me, he thought. Laughter surrounded him, but it was not enough to lighten his spirits. He quietly stepped out of the Wynn at midnight, and no one noticed him. He put one foot in front of another. He looked up to see the sky, and the lights that caused excitement that touched everyone but him. Sydney touched his soul. She brought pleasure into his life, and light into his darkened heart. He walked slowly, wondering what he could have done wrong. Finally he reached Caesar's. He took the long route through the shops because he wanted to blend in and have time to think before he entered the bar. He saw a young woman turn to acknowledge that she recognized him. The woman looked and quickly turned her head. Maybe it wasn't Danny McLeod. How could this be Danny? This man looked a mess. That confident swagger was gone, the walk he had for Sydney that made him feel as if he was the luckiest man in the world, gone. Finally, Danny reached the bar and there sat Max with a young beauty. Danny slumped into the chair with his head bent looking at the floor. He did not make eye contact with Max or Paige. He was in a wilderness of pain. Danny, this is Paige, Danny. Max said, gesturing. Your producers left because I couldn't hold them here any longer. You will have to see them again, in LA. Danny did not hear Max, and he barely noticed the young woman sitting next to him. Her long curvaceous legs made her stance about 6 feet without high heels, which made her taller than Danny, who is 6'2". He did not notice her statuesque body, or whether she was pretty or gorgeous. He lacked interest. He was cold. Paige, enthralled at the sight of this handsome actor, could not take her eyes off him. She became quiet, listening attentively as Danny and Max talked. Paige lived in New York, and Max represented her at his agency. She is a model and wanted to move into acting. Paige was ambitious and willing to do what was necessary to get what she wanted. Her currency was her beauty and other covert behaviors. Her complexion rosy and youthful, a brunette, and at a glance her features were a younger version of Sydney. Danny sobered up long enough to glance at Paige, and during a conversation with Max, he noticed that she resembled Sydney. Danny remembered thinking that Sydney was older than Paige, but Sydney had an innocence about her that was not apparent in Paige. Paige was hard, posing as soft, cold, trying for hot outer beauty but no inner beauty. She was a contradiction, so much so that Danny did not recognize it until it was too late. This was not a flaw in his character, he just could not recognize anything since Sydney disappeared. Paige eased up to Danny, studying his every mood, like a panther waiting for a prey. She was soon to pounce and eat him alive. "Can I buy you a drink, Danny?" she purred, looking through his facade. "No, I don't allow women to buy me." "I mean to buy me drinks," he said, making a Freudian slip. Danny didn't notice Paige until he drank 4 glasses of straight scotch. He did not notice when Max slipped away. He did not notice his steps that took him to Paige's room. "You're beautiful, Sydney," he exclaimed in a fog saturated by liquor. Paige never corrected him, she just fed him more scotch. Then she spoke with her head teetering side to side in a street gesture. "I've got something that's going to get you higher and make you forget this, Sydney." "I don't want to forget, Sydney. I just want to get high, bring it on," he stated out of his mind. Paige poured her cache of cocaine onto a mirror, snorted some, and offered it to Danny. She showed him what to do, and he was all game. As the white powder circled his brain, he shouted, "Wow." Danny found himself in a death dance with drugs. His party with Paige lasted all day and into the night. He discovered that he could experience orgasm after orgasm. Well, that was for the first day, then his body was spent. He emptied himself of the longing for Sydney's body. He was now in love with the drug, and he thought he was in love with that young version of Sydney. Paige took the drug in stride. It did not affect her the way it affected Danny. She was calm, but Danny's heart was racing as soon as he started coming down. He was hooked on cocaine, and Paige knew it. "Paige, you have more coke?" he said slowly, slurring his words with his eyes fixed on the floor. "I'm out, but I can get more." He gave her a large wad of bills to purchase what they needed to continue their bacchanal. After Paige gave Danny a drink, she took his money and left. It was now 4 o'clock in the morning, on the 3rd day of Sydney's departure. Danny didn't ask Paige where she was going to get more drugs. He hoped she would hurry back. Paige slipped out of the room. She did not have to go far. She got into the elevator and stopped on the next floor, walked to a door and used a key. "Hey lover," were the words coming from her handsome boyfriend Anthony, who was more of a hustler than his status as her full-time boyfriend. He met Paige in New York at his club called the Red Carpet. It was a disguise for selling drugs. Paige was great for his business, a model that traveled in the company of rich actors and actresses, sports figures, musicians, and high-priced, high-powered business people. "You got something for me?" he said, looking at her hand holding $100 bills. "Danny needs more coke," she said, laughing. "Go easy on that stuff, I told you. Go easy with him, remember you're mine." He smiled after giving her a package, then pawing her large breast and skinny body. Anthony pried his fingers into her panties to see if she had just had intercourse. He put his fingers to his nose, then threw her on the bed, and fucked her hard and furious to punish her for what he knew she was doing with Danny. She took the drugs and left after she showered off the smell of Anthony's abuse. Paige arrived at her room, opened the door to find Danny sleeping from too much scotch and lack of coke to keep him awake. Danny slept for 2 days straight, waking to order food and use the restroom. He had been in Las Vegas for 6 days, and had not ventured outside to feel the warmth of the Las Vegas sun. The chill of the nights with Paige enveloped his body. The phone rang and rang. This time Danny woke to find himself in strange surroundings. The room filthy with food and clothes tossed everywhere. He had to focus before he understood where he was and what was going on. Paige heard the hotel phone and looked over at Danny to see if he was asleep before she answered. "Paige, let me talk to Danny," boomed a strong, hard voice. Paige reached over pillows thrown between her and the body of Danny, then presenting the phone to him. Danny made a line of pillows between him and Paige. Paige thought it strange, but never questioned him on it. The only questions she ever had were for Anthony. She was jealous of anyone that came near him, and Anthony was equally jealous, but their sexual non-commitments made them more desirous to each other. Danny was just a means to an end for Paige, and she was no light to Danny's midnight. "Danny, what do you think of Paige, good hum?" Max said, looking for credit. "Yay, she's okay," Danny chanted in a comatose state. "She's more than okay, she is hot and sexy, which I'm sure you have tested the waters. When are you coming back to LA? I have meetings arranged for you. You should be here and ready for work in a week," he said emphatically. "I don't know if I want to go back to work so soon," Danny said, slow and careless. "Look, Danny, don't start this shit with me. Be here and ready to work in a week. I am not taking no for an answer, and don't let me have to come get you. Let me talk to Paige." "Listen, Paige, if you don't get him sober and he's not here in a week, I will see that no one hires you. Do I make myself clear?" Paige understood Max, and she knew he was a vicious man to deal with. He did not take kindly to anyone crossing him. Danny finally sobered up, and Paige helped him get himself together to get back to LA and to his job of being an actor. Danny did not ask Paige to accompany him to his home in LA, she just tagged along. She knew he needed her for sex and drugs, and he satisfied her need for money. On the ride to Danny's home, Paige informed Danny that she had to stop off to pick up some drugs. Danny did not resist because he was still under a fog, and the coke was doing the thinking for him. Paige stopped at a corner in LA that resembled a third world country. It was in this neighborhood Anthony stashed his drugs. He had a few places in New York where he put drugs on demand. Anthony followed the money and Paige. Danny waited an hour in a car for Paige, fearing for his life. During his wait, he called Sydney and left messages. He text messaged WRU telling her how much he loved her and still no answer. Paige emerged from an alley in the back of a townhouse and drove Danny to his home. When Danny became a little sober, Paige no longer interested him, but she came with the drugs, a package deal. He wanted to numb himself to the world, and he wanted to forget Sydney. He was getting close but not close enough. So he took more coke. "Sydney is a cold-hearted bitch," he said to hear how it sounded to his brain, but there was a hush. "No, she isn't. She's more than any man could want," he thought. His conversation kept going in circles. "She must have a good reason for what she did. What reason could she have to make me think I was the only man in her life?" he said, shouting. Danny was a man possessed, and he was determining to wrench the control Sydney had over him. He was going to take his mind and body back, even if he had to drown himself in scotch and cocaine. Paige gave Danny more coke. She did not try to stop him. The more he took, the more he thought and talked about Sydney. He talked all night into the next day and the next. His life was full with the need for drugs and conversations about Sydney. As time passed, Danny forgot about the job in Canada. He forgot about Sydney. He forgot about Paige and Max. He forgot about everyone and everything, except the coke he now craved. When he sobered up after months of drug use and not being able to score more drugs, he finally came to his senses. He realized the producers fired him from the job in Canada, and he could be in serious trouble if they take him to court. Max called to give more bad news. The production company replaced him with Philip Cross. Danny was livid. Max circulated gossip that Danny was ill, and he would be ready for another film any time. Max took on another job, that of saving Danny's ass. Danny and Paige languished in bed sick from drugs and asleep most days and nights with little else happening. The sex stopped. Drugs replaced all feelings that he possessed. Whatever they meant to each other was over. They were two drug-addicted fools who had too much time and money. The only thing they had in common was the need for a warm body. Danny had no one again, and Paige's thoughts were for her boyfriend Anthony, who had gone back to New York. Paige could still buy drugs at his location, and that continued for almost a year. The ringing never left, and the pounding was stifling, until Danny became aware it was the phone instead of his head. He reached over Paige to pick up the phone, and glanced to see if she was alive. She had been sleeping so soundly that she had to be dead. He touched her to make sure. "What the fuck are you doing to yourself and me? What kind of schmuck have you become?" shouted Max. Max never beat around the bush, always direct. "I forgot about Canada," Danny said in a low voice. "I can't go on a vacation without you doing something stupid. I'm not a babysitter. Do you hear me, Danny?" Max screamed into the phone. "How could you forget?" Max shouted. "How many more jobs are you going to lose before you wake up? It's not Sydney again, no, because she wouldn't have allowed you to give up an opportunity like that," he said, knowing how good Sydney was for Danny and never admitting it until now. "Look, Max, get off my back." "Fuck you, Danny, now I know why Sydney left you. You are an immature ass." Danny understood his weakness, but he did not want Max to shine a light that everyone could see, including him. He still wanted to wallow around in the darkness. "Stop pissing around with me, Max. I don't want you to mention Sydney again." "Is Paige with you?" "Yes." "Why?" Danny said, puzzled. "I'm coming over." "Don't come, I'm into something." "That's what I am afraid of." Max dropped the phone and arrived at Danny's house within an hour. Danny tried to hide the signs of drugs, but Max had seen everything. There was nothing Max didn't know or uncover just from observation. Max walked into Danny's once beautiful home and knew what was going on. The house told its own story. The house saw what others did not see. The house was a mirror of its owner, unkempt and unloved. It hadn't been cleaned in months, with soiled boxes of pizza, and an assortment of unrecognizable food in every room. The house reeked of dirty sheets and clothes. Every corner, you could see drug paraphernalia and cigarette butts. Max remembered thinking that it was a wonder the house didn't burn down. "Look, Danny, you are on something. Looking at Paige in your bed, I would say coke and pills." "You are the one that introduced me to her," he said, not caring about anything and anyone. "No one told you to fuck her and take drugs," Max shouted. "Everyone is talking about you." "They don't know what I'm doing," Danny said, trying to convince himself. "Danny, you can't make the hurt go away with drugs. You're throwing your life away. I can't spend my time trying to keep you off drugs and make sure you go to a job. This is Hollywood. Actors have been doing this shit since the beginning, and every one of you who go this route end up with nothing, alone and broke and sometimes dead. Is that what you want? Do you think no one knows what you are doing? Look in the mirror." Danny turned and faced the mirror. His green eyes and fuzzy mind saw the same thing at the same time. "Who is that bum?" were the questions his eyes and mind circulated. It was Danny. "Max, why did you introduce her into my life?" Danny said with tears falling, and not caring how Paige felt about his statement. "I thought you needed cheering up. I didn't think you were crazy enough to take drugs and fuck your life up more. You have to get yourself together. Get rid of Paige. I'm lonely and I need someone." You can't fool me, she's the one who is supplying those drugs. Send her back to New York and clean yourself up. You're going to get in serious trouble, Max screamed.